Recording, good. All right. So it wasn't exactly a minute, but I figure if anybody's going to come, they'll come and they'll join us. So I want to welcome you all this afternoon to a presentation, Doxil, more dev, less ops. My name is Sean Dietrich. I am easiest title I can put up there is Senior Drupal Developer at Canopy Studios. We are an agency that help people expand their voice on the internet. So everything from Drupal development to WordPress to React to many different aspects, including content strategy and design. We help people with. How to find me? I'm on Twitter, Drupal.org, and some other form of social media. I usually go by one of those. So Twitter is going to be Sean E. Dietrich, some form of that. Additionally, I am a contributor to the Doxil project, as well as I've been a Drupal developer for roughly a little more than 10 years. So I have that. I do want to quickly go through just a few things of what we're going to cover. I'm going to give you some kind of background information about what Doxil is. We're going to see how easy it is to install it. Taking your existing projects and how to add Doxil to it and the ease of that. Additionally, we're going to go over extending Doxil. One of the questions I got was, hey, is this going to be a hands-on? The answer is yes and no. Most of the hands-on is basically going to be me demoing and kind of showing you, if we have time, go through 3 different use cases. If we don't, then I'm going to at least try to get through 1 or 2 of them. And then from there, we'll do some Q&A. What I will not be going over specifically, we won't be going over how to configure Docker, or any kind of specifics about it. I'm providing a link. You can go to docs.docker.com if you have any information. Additionally, I will mention how you can kind of use Doxil in CI and continuous integration, continuous deployment services, and kind of what that would look like, which would also be kind of tying in with something we call Doxil sandboxes. If you're familiar with Pantheon's multi-dev or Acquia's similar service, which I'm drawing a blank on at the moment, it's a similar idea. Additionally, there will be some bash scripting. It's kind of showing up on the screen. I will not go over how to really do that, but I've given kind of the basics of how to write a bash script if you're unfamiliar with it. And then the other thing I'd like to point out is Doxil is not the only solution. There are other solutions out there. There's Lando, there's DDev, there's Lagoon. I just found out about another similar service out in the hallway. There are other solutions out there, but primarily we'll be just going over Doxil and its aspects. So, quick poll, just a show of hands, how many of us are developers? Okay, good amount. And then how many of us are familiar with Docker or use it in our normal development cycle? Okay, roughly about half. How many people are actually using something else at the moment? So using Vagrant, using Drupal VM, or even using MAMP of some sort? Okay. And then the final question, how many people have heard of Doxil before? Okay, so that's awesome.
How many is it?
I'm sorry?
How many people?
It's roughly about half for all the questions. The Doxil thing was roughly about a quarter, it looked like, so not too many. So the reason why I'm incorporating this with DevOps, and I'll actually get to the definition of that is kind of one of my roles at Canopy, is how do we automate things? How do we make things quicker for people to develop? How do we make it so that we're not spending time dealing with problems that don't have to do with development? If we're constantly doing something one right after the other, and it's just a constant process that we're repeating every single time, what can we put in place? One of that is development environments. So, biggest when someone tries to ask me, well, when you do DevOps, can you explain, like, what do you do? And sometimes it's the least technical people that I'm trying to explain this to. So I usually show them this picture. Basically, it's one of those 6-column, 6-picture things that says what my mom thinks I do, what my friends think I do, what I actually do. So I'd say they are pretty somewhat accurate. My mom thinks I just play around with computers. My boss definitely thinks I just put out fires. And I think I just do magic. So, and then lastly, what I actually am doing is clearing all the poop. Basically shoveling it and making sure that we can just continue to go on with what we're doing. So, what Amazon classifies as real DevOps is the combination of culture, philosophies, practices, and tools that increase all organizations' ability to deliver applications and services at high velocity. That's a lot to take in. Basically, and then the last piece is evolving and improving products at a fast pace. I'm not going to go read the rest because you guys can read it. What does that mean? Let's basically sit and talk about that for a second. Basically, like I was saying, how do we increase productivity? How do we take things that we've been manually doing over time, and how do we automate them? How do we, if we're doing it all the time and we have the same outcome every time we're doing it, then wouldn't it make sense to automate them? Wouldn't it make sense to take that out of the equation and just kind of speed up our development? So here's a few additional questions, not really for our audience participation, but do you find yourselves ever duplicating efforts? So doing the same process from start to finish, not just in one project, but in multiple projects. Do you find yourself really only installing software just for one project? So you have a client who has a unique need, and they need a later version of, they come in as support and they're a later version of PHP, or they're using some sort of special setup. So do you find yourself installing that software just for that one client? Additionally, when you're working, and you bring other devs onto your team, are you finding that it's taking you over an hour plus to kind of get them on board, explain the project, explain the setup, help them set up their local? This could be for new or existing devs. So, that's been a kind of a pain point in many teams that I've seen, where they bring somebody in and it can sometimes take 2, 3, even 2 to 3 days. So 2-3 hours, but it could sometimes take days to get somebody on board, make sure they're understanding stuff, make sure they have the right version of PHP, MySQL, Apache, even things like if we're installing Varnish. Those are all things that kind of go into this dev cycle that's kind of increase before that person coming in is actually productive. And then, as developers, are you finding yourself taking extremely long time to set up your local environments? Does it take you? That was kind of part of the previous one. Is it taking a while? Is it taking 2, 3, 4 days, even for yourself, to set up something? We work on projects, and then there could be some reason why we stop, or we stop on a project and we go and do, we go pick up something else, and then we got to come back to the project. So at that point, making sure we have those resources that we originally needed, making sure nothing about the project changed since I've installed it. So, particularly at Canopy, I along with a few of our other team members, we do support. And so I could touch a support client, I could help a support client, and then not really speak or interact with that client for 2, 3, 4 months. But at that point, it's, do I leave their stuff on my machine and kind of keep up, leave that space reserved for that person until they may never come back to me? And then lastly, do you find yourself going insane? Basically, as a combination of these things. Do you find yourself, just trying to figure out ways to kind of make yourself more productive? The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different outcomes. So, we go through these, and sometimes we're writing scripts, we're writing ways to automate the process of installing databases, installing new sites for ourselves, and just over periods of time, those scripts evolve. But now you have to share those with your team, and hopefully they can be as productive as you. So that becomes a bit of a hassle. That leads us into Doxil. Doxil is a tool used for managing dev environments. The idea behind it is it helps minimize configuration. So by that I mean that it is helping you make sure you have the proper version of PHP. It's making sure you have the proper version of Apache, the proper version of even MySQL. Additionally, other services that you may need for that project. It's consistent. So it uses, it's based off of Docker, which is one of its additional features, and it uses Docker images to kind of cultivate and kind of give you this collection of tools that you can now use within your project. And then the greatest thing I particularly like about it is that it helps with efficient onboarding. So the thought is that you can commit your these custom scripts that you're writing to speed up your development. You can commit your configuration for that project into the project, and in that way, the next developer who comes on board, or even if you come back to it in 2, 3, 4 months, you still have the same environment, you still have everything you need to, but you're not required to really dedicate space to that. Some of the great features, as I said, Docker-based. So if we aren't familiar with Docker, it is a tool used for containerizing or segmenting pieces of functionality that we can then use elsewhere. They're portable, meaning that I can quickly remove them and add them back in. I can take them from one machine and bring them over to another machine. And they're just easier to work with. They're usually smaller than actually committing a full virtual machine image. By default, it comes with an AMP stack, so Apache, MySQL, PHP. It does have different versions, so it has everything from 7.2 all the way down to 5.6. It's easy to install. We will actually see how easy it is to install in roughly, I think, 2 or 3 slides. And then it's cross-platform, so it works on your Windows, it will work on your Mac, it will work on your Linux machine. And then the cool piece that I particularly like about it is it's extendable. So I can write functions of automation, functions of scripts and tools that will help not just myself, but extend upon the base platform, which what is given to us. So, yes?
Can you talk a little bit about that configurability, like versions? So if you want to run different versions of, say, Varnish or Solar or something like that, then what's the default? Is it?
Yeah, so I will actually get to, later on, I'll actually show what the configuration file looks like, and then that way we can kind of explain where you can, I'll quickly point out in Docker Hub, like how you can specify, you want PHP 7 or you want Solar 3 versus Solar 4 or even Solar 6. So any of those. All right. And so the biggest question is why Docker? And this is more of the aspect that the culture, I think, is trying to move forward with. Kind of segmenting away from Doxil for a second, but why Docker? So the biggest thing is on the left-hand side, we have virtual machines, and with virtual machines, every application not only includes tens of megabytes, which is necessary for the application, but it also includes the binaries. So any special programs that specific virtual machine needs runs segmented in that specific VM. Additionally, the virtual machine has what's called a guest OS. So that sits on top of your machine, and it's basically a similar, it's like its own operating system. It runs parallel to what you're currently running. So if you're running Windows, Mac, or Linux, it sits on top of it, and it runs as its own machine. Well, the problem with that is that now you can get into spaces. These VMs can take tens of gigs, sometimes even hundreds of gigs, depending on your project's needs. So then we look at Docker. Well, with Docker, we realize that we share a lot of the same things. So we share a lot of, we share this need for the operating system. So with your projects, they all are necessarily going to use some form of Linux. Most I think web servers are running Apache, and so with that instance, then why shouldn't your application share that? Additionally, any additional libraries that you need specifically for your application are now only included for that specific piece, for that service. So now you're taking something that could take tens to even hundreds of gigs of data to something that now is taking possibly less than a gig, depending on the size of the actual image that you end up using. It's also, the biggest thing is they're portable. So you can pick them up from one machine, bring them over to another. You can even take them from your local and put them up into, say, AWS or Google Cloud. So with that being said, we're going to segue into installing Doxil. Now, this is one of the great features about it. On macOS and Linux, it's really just this one single line through your terminal. You paste that in, and it guides you step by step on how to install that. Now, there was a question I was asked earlier, which was, what if you have Vagrant? And that's actually a very good question, because some of the devs that I've ran into use Vagrant. They use it on projects, and it's what they've been using and trying to, I don't want to say convert, but try to transform them over into other projects that have Doxil installed on them. The problem that they were having was, we can't install them side by side. Well, we've kind of solved that, and that's what that blog post is right there. Is getting Doxil and Vagrant to work together kind of coherently. Additionally, with Windows, you are kind of required to run a Linux subsystem. So right now, the recommendation is something called Baboon, which virtualizes a Linux environment for you. Additionally, it does work for the Ubuntu shell, and there has been kind of a walkthrough about that. It's still, unfortunately, in the experimental phase, but I have heard pretty good things about that.
That's a question.
Yeah.
The first one,
Yep.
subsystem, is that the same as a virtual environment?
Very similar, yeah.
Okay. And the second one is more like a emulator?
They're very similar, actually, the same thing.
Okay.
Yeah, so the subsystem is, the Ubuntu subsystem is an extension of Windows, and it runs a virtual Linux environment on top of Windows. Baboon does very similar, the same thing. If you're familiar with Cygwin, which is actually like a really big one for Windows, it's almost the same concept for that.
Cool.
All right. So this kind of brings us into, okay, great, I've installed Doxil. What do I do with it? How do I work with it? And so we start moving into, how do we include this with our projects? Well, we have two ways of doing this. We have a command within there. So the command that's used for Doxil is called fin. And through there, we have different commands: fin project, fin bash, fin exec. But on top of that, we have one specific one called project. through project, you have a wizard that kind of walks you through, hey, do you want to do a Drupal 8? Excuse me. Do you want to do a Drupal 8? Do you want to do a Drupal 7? Do you want to do a Symfony? So we just recently added Symfony, Symfony web apps, Symfony skeletons, as well as things like WordPress. So we are very big into WordPress. Our development's kind of 50-50. So we need something that actually works on different aspects. And that's another thing about Doxil specifically, is because it's not specifically geared towards just Drupal. It's aimed to work with just about any project. And then we have a wizard. So we have the wizard. The wizard walks you through, says, hey, what platform do you want to use? But what if you already have an existing project? The great thing about it is you just have to have a .doxil folder within your project group, and then you do something simple as fin start. And then by doing fin start, Doxil looks for that folder and assumes all of the defaults for that. There are additional ways to configure past that point, where your document root is. Some document roots have a subfolder that says web or even doc.root, or even something else, so public HTML. There are many different forms of it. Those are configurable. So we have two additional things at the bottom. We built something with using the Drupal 8 Composer project, which basically gives you a Drupal 8 instance built on top of Composer. Whereas I think the boilerplate we currently have in the Doxil is it's more built with Drush, so it has the whole core downloaded and stored in the repository. Whereas I think the way we're starting to go in Drupal specifically is we're only wanting to commit our custom code. And then additionally, as I was saying, we have other boilerplates. So we have Magento, WordPress, different Symfony. We have a backdrop. We have as well as a Drupal 7 and 8, as well as it's ever growing. So take a look at those. And then we kind of go into next phase. Okay, well, I've installed Doxil. I've created a project. What does this do for me now? My needs for this project are different than maybe the next project I work on, or my needs are different than your needs. So what can we do specifically? So one of the cool things out of the box is Doxil comes with these tools specifically. So it has PHP. Obviously, I've said that a few times, so you guys understand that. We have MySQL. We have Memcache. We have Drupal console as well as Drush. This icon, which I just happened to find out, is Selenium. I didn't know Selenium had a logo. Varnish, Solar, and etc. So the list goes on. Additionally, on top of this, you can use anything that's available in Docker Hub. So, so a Docker Hub image can be downloaded and can actually you can start to use in your project. So when we're extending, we can do a few different things. So on the left-hand side, this is what extending does. We can either create commands or add-ons. Commands are specifically one-time use items that help condense and run specific pieces of code that we would run normally. So clear cache, database import, download a database and import the database. To things like, hey, I want to take my set of files and I want to package them up and I wanted to ship them off to an S3 bucket. They could be anything. Add-ons are additional functionality such as Solar, which if you need to extend Solar past what the standard stock version is, then that's an additional way you can do that. There are also add-ons are ways that you can share them between other projects. So you're definitely going to be using the same version of Solar for all of your projects. You have a specific set of customizations for it. I mean, the one thing I ask myself is, who really likes setting up Solar? Who likes configuring it? Who likes setting those up all the time and have to constantly do it every single project? And so that, by doing those, you now speed up your workflow. So we have the same set of configuration that we can now transport. We can use it in this in project A, we can use it in project B, C, etc., etc. The items, so between the commands and the add-ons, they're shareable. So meaning that you can have a command that specifically is not project specific, but helps you with your workflow on other projects. So there might not be a need for your team to have a specific command or a specific workflow, but you might have something. It might be something that you're consistently doing from project to project. And so that you can keep in kind of what we call a global folder, and that global folder is shared across all of your projects, and use those. They're also reusable. So as kind of getting is, you can take the add-ons are the reusable piece. So you can take them from one project to another, and then have the same set of configuration. One of the interesting things is the ability to target specific environments. Now, when you do this with Docker directly, you have to identify what container do you want to run this in, what specific, what script you want to run, kind of this long, lengthy, intricate command that basically you really only want to do one thing. You only want to run drush within your container, or you have a specific set of SQL commands that you want to run within that specific your MySQL container that says like, hey, I just want to clear cache, or I want to dump all of the tables in here. And so rather by doing that, you now take the need away from hosting it on your own machine, and now everything's running within the container. So it now becomes independent of what your teammates are using. It's now everything that's in kind of this segmented environment that everybody's basically using. On the right, we do have ways of extending, and kind of what I'm specifically talking about. So with Apache, we with Drupal specifically, people are using the Sage file proxy module, and the concept with that is that you don't have to download all of your files to your local machine. You can have them go off to a remote. Well, the problems I see with that is that sometimes it can be slow. It has to run through the whole Drupal system to see, hey, does this file exist? And then usually I'm finding that if the file doesn't exist, it goes out and it kind of presents it. Well, my question is, well, if we're doing that, so then why don't we do that with just on the Apache layer? I mean, Apache can tell you, hey, I want to see if that file exists, but now I don't have to run different functions of PHP in order to test this. I can simply just say, hey, this file exists. If not, then we go out and we grab it. Additional ways, increasing memory, working with special projects like Symfony, you can inject database credentials, changing your file post sizes, just modifying the PHP variables in general. Those are additional ways. And then MySQL, you could modify your the MySQL configuration as well. So things like enabling slow query logging, changing and modifying kind of the buffer sizes for your inner DB, as well as where do your files get logged at. So segueing over, here are there's these two, and then I'll actually have another more intricate one. These are commands that are we built specifically to help ease the process. So normally with the top one, with the composer wrapper, specifically I would type like fin exec and then composer and then any additional things. But specifically I'm targeting the saying, hey, I want to run this command in my CLI container, which is where my PHP is. I want to call the composer command into that container, and then any arguments I pass to that script, I want to pass them to composer directly. So now this takes the need of me actually saying, hey, let me type fin exec and then all the additional things. So additionally, I've done things like changing into the project group, because we've all at least I have done the part where I'm doing composer require and I'm maybe 2 or 3 levels deep into the project and yells at me that, hey, we can't find a composer JSON file, or this is the best file we have for you. So rather than me constantly have to go change directory and go to that specific folder, I could add an additional item here, like I've done here at the bottom, which basically would say, hey, we're just going to change the project root and then we're going to run this command. Additionally, in theming, we set things with gulp, specifically to help compile Sass, help compile, minify all of our JavaScript, minify our CSS, and so additionally, this is kind of what I was saying is you can change into that directory. So if I'm not in my site theme and I want to say, hey, I want to compile the gulp, I want to compile the CSS and I want to minify the JavaScript, then by doing so, I know where my theme is, I know where those items are, and I know especially what gulp command I want to run. Additionally, we have, there is a piece, as soon as this thing moves, that will basically, any arguments I provide to gulp will pass through to gulp itself. So if I have a specific task I want to run instead, then I can say fin gulp and then Sass or fin gulp uglify, which will then take this need to simplify going to the specific theme and then running gulp in there. The next script kind of is more in depth, but one of the things I found myself doing all the time was going to a specific host, using Drush, or even things like Terminus to download. Terminus is a Pantheon command line tool, for those who aren't aware, but specifically, I found myself doing the same thing over and over and over, and that was going to my remote host, using Drush to download, basically export a database, and then upon downloading the database, now I have to bring it back into my local, and then upon bringing it into my local, I have to import, and it becomes this long, intricate process that I've now spent maybe 5, sometimes 10 minutes to do, depending on how easy it is to get into the host. Well, I'm finding out the same process works for everybody. Every host that we're using so far has had the need where I can use Drush to connect remotely. I can use Drush to download the database, actually output Drush to the screen, the SQL dump to the screen, and then using a set of input-output characters, storing it to my container locally. And at that point, I can then do Drush to drop everything that I'm doing in that project, and then I'll have a new database. So within less than a minute, we've taken that process that now took maybe 5-10 minutes to do, and now does it in less than a minute and does it reliably every time. So when we're working on features, specific features for a client, and we're constantly trying to churn out development, and we need to refresh our database every single time we're doing that, just so we don't possibly step on the toes of a feature that may not have been approved yet, or additional features which might not be ready to be approved yet, might not be able to be reviewed yet. We can now start to use this, and now we see return in use because it's constantly doing the same thing. So one additional factor I put in here was that I said, hey, if this database is less than an hour old, let's just use the cached version. So, in no project that I've ever worked on has a database need to be updated more frequent than every hour. And I mean, this is changeable, so we could exchange 60 minutes for if you need something every 5 minutes even, if you find yourself doing that. So rather than doing that, I've done also things where instead of being every 60 minutes, I've done it every 2 hours, every 3 hours, sometimes even every day, because maybe the database is that large that there just isn't a need to constantly refresh it. And at that case, it just tells me like, hey, my cached version is still good. for this amount of time, let's use that instead. Jumping over to add-ons. Now these are some of the add-ons that are included. So kind of separating the two. Commands are single scripts, single file scripts that serve a specific purpose. So as you saw, one of the scripts was refreshing a database. Another one was just a composer wrapper. Another one was a gulp wrapper. There are constantly different things we could use to kind of speed up our workflow. We jump into add-ons, and now add-ons are ways that you can expand upon. They go deeper than commands, and they go deeper in the sense that, hey, I'm running PHP unit, or I'm running a site that is constantly sending out emails, so I need something like Mailhog to capture those emails so I can review them, and I don't want them to go out to the intended users, because they might be not necessary. I mean, we're doing development. We want to make sure that whatever mail system we're using works. We want to make sure that the information we're sending in the email is working properly. So we're building a new email that's supposed to go out for that client. We want to test it beforehand rather than having it possibly go out 10, 15 times to the person because we want to test. Even accidentally, if it goes out to that person, it can sometimes have a detrimental effect that you're saying, I'm sorry, you didn't mean for that to go to you. We're just developing and we're testing, so you can tell them, hey, ignore that. And sometimes that just takes extra time than if you put something in place that just says, hey, let me capture those. Recently, we added PHP My Admin. There's a kind of piggybacking off of that idea of anything that's in Docker Hub, we can expand upon, and that's in Docker Hub. So there are many people who don't have SQL clients. There are many people who don't like using SQL clients. Some people who just like using PHP My Admin, or Adminer, which is a similar one. They're both web-based. So there's some people who just prefer using that, and coming from what they've used, whether it be Drupal VM or even MAMP, that is what they're used to. So having them now download something like MySQL Workbench, or having them download something like SQL Pro, that is actually another one, is SQL Pro, a SQL Pro add-on, so you quickly open that up. But instead of having them now use those additional clients, they now have a web-based client that they can use. These are examples. This might not be up to date, so if you want to learn more, this is also a community-driven repository. So if you find tools that end up working better for you, if there are add-ons you would like to see, then go over, let's file an issue for that, and let's see if we can get one. All right, so the biggest thing to always remember as developers, and I don't like the other acronym, keep it simple, stupid, because let's be honest, we are awesome at what we do. I mean, we're employed by the people we are because we are awesome at what we do. So we are the superheroes. And yes, you guys are the superheroes. So let's keep it simple, so that not only is it easy on your job, but it's easy for your team to get on board and to start working on projects, to start being productive. The concept that I wanted to go with for this particular talk is this idea of a one command and done. Now, I was briefly having a conversation with a friend of mine back east, and she mentioned to me that, I use such and such product, which is a MAMP-based product, and I don't have any issues with that. I said, well, do you ever find it that you're having issues with onboarding people, new developers? Are you finding it that you're using specific versions of tools that you have to install locally now? She goes, no, I don't have that issue. I said, okay, well, when you start going into the need of, hey, I have Ruby. I need Ruby to compile my Sass instead of NPM or Gulp to compile it. Or if your versions of PHP for Drupal 6, 7, 8, even things like Symfony. What if you need specific versions for those? She goes, oh, I didn't think about that. It's not really handled by the tool I'm using, so we just kind of develop with what we need. I said, okay, well, what if you had a configuration for that? Well, that just doesn't work like that. That it does, because we have a team who, we're slowly moving them over to it, and they're finding that it's easy for them to use, it's easier for them to get on board, it's easier for them to start working on things. So the concept is fin init, and init is a command within your project that does a whole amount of different things. It destroys a project if you need to. It initializes the project, so it makes sure you have the right containers, and makes sure you have them set up properly, and makes sure you have it makes sure you install everything properly. Then, so we install the platform that you're using, the framework. So whether it be Drupal, whether it be WordPress, whether it be anything else, whether it's just a straight HTML page, it's installing the proper tools that you need to get that working. And then it sets up everything. So if it needs to go out to a remote host, grab a database, it does that. The concept is that you have one command to start a project, and within 5 to 10 minutes, you have a local environment that is replicatable from my machine to the next machine to the next machine. And so that way, you can have a new developer come in, and you're not spending 1, 2, 3, etc. hours working with them to say, hey, now we have to download this version of PHP, we have to get this version of MAMP. We need to make sure you can use MAMP Pro, because we need to have special configuration for that. And that's another thing, is like, why deal with the configuration? If someone on your team is a rock star at that, why should you have to also deal with that and kind of spend your time working with that and fiddling with your local in order to have that working? So specifically, the reason for the image is that on your host machine, the only thing you are running is this fin init, which destroys and creates the containers. Everything else is assumed to be running in the containers, therefore no additional software is needed on your machine. Everything that's required for that project is in those containers. And then when, yes?
I'm just curious, having fin init is pain, as many of us have. So can you do a fin init and passive parameters, or how to ask you questions, like if you have a proxy that's blocking all kinds of stuff, you need to have like a challenge response, you need to put in username and password, what the proxy address is, to get it to configure Git and Composer, all that to correctly go through it? Yeah,
so the concept is you actually have a blank canvas. So you can kind of, the sky's the limit. Anything you can think of that's going to make it easier for a new person to come on board and get that project started, then put that in there. So I particularly write mine in Bash, just because I like that better sometimes, and it's easier for people to understand. I've seen scripts written in PHP. I've seen scripts written in all sorts of other languages.
So whatever parameters those scripts are echoing back or asking for will happen.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So like I said, the one command is fin init, and then that handles if you want to ask questions like, hey, particularly we're working on an integration that will go to a provider and give you a list of projects and say, hey, which project do you want to download? Yeah. And so at that point, it downloads the project and kind of builds it up from that point. Like I said, you have a blank canvas, so whatever is going to be great for you, your organization, or your team in general to kind of get them from point A to point B in the quickest amount of time, then I would suggest that.
I work on a team of 12 developers. Each developer on my team has spent at least 100 hours setting up their workstations. at least. And when they break, it's another 100 hours trying to figure it out, because it's not reproducible. Which is absolutely good, right?
Yeah, it's a common problem that as developers we face is, hey, what version of, and I've been saying this throughout the whole talk, but what version of PHP are you using? What version of Apache? What version of, such and such are you using? And that becomes a bit of an issue. Yeah.
One of the issues that I've run into with Vagrant is performance. So can you talk about how this performs versus bare metal or versus Vagrant? Kind of how that plays out.
Yes, I will. Can we wait until the QA piece and then I will pick that up? And if I don't get a chance to talk to you, then I will come to you personally and we will have that conversation. The goal that you want to have is to have your development environment be almost identical to your production environment. And I mean as identical as possible. So you have, if you're using Varnish in production, you have Varnish installed on your local. If you're using additional PHP modules, you have those installed in your container. The goal is to have them pretty much identical so that you can mitigate any issues that are foreseeable. So granted, we won't get to 100%, we won't get everything, but the goal is to get as close to 100% as possible and save time that you may spend. Oh, well, Apache was configured this way and we didn't know that. Or PHP has this particular module and we didn't develop for that. Or and this actually happened, is we developed for a newer version of PHP and your version is older. So what do? Now we have to spend time with the hosting company to get that newer version installed, or B, now we have to roll back and say, okay, well, how do we use that version? Is there something we're using in our code that is not going to work for them? And so that is extra time that, had you spent even if you spend, at first, you do spend, 100 hours setting up a project, that 100 hours is now,
You can give it.
Yeah, you can give it to somebody and they can start developing and it's not going to break. And then if it does break, you can fix it and then release it to them, and now, hey, they no longer have to spend the extra time fixing that. So I am going to say that we got about 15 minutes. I'm going to try to get through a few of these as quickly as possible, just to kind of explain the concept behind it. So the first one I'm going to start with is, no, I won't.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
You might not know this. Currently, Doxil isn't supported on Ubuntu 18.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know anything about when that might happen?
That is definitely in the works. In fact, there is Doxil version 1.9, which we were just having the release meeting on yesterday, which I believe that was one of the items is getting 18 taken care of.
Nice.
And so Ubuntu is the kind of like the main piece we're testing things on, but now we're starting to go things like, oh, okay, well, not everybody uses Ubuntu. People are using Alpine Linux, or people are using different versions of Linux. And so we're recognizing that to the fact that we're now expanding upon trying to get those other involved. But 18 should be, let me double check. If you want to leave me your contact information, I can reach out to you and kind of answer any additional questions. Yeah.
Real quick, I just pulled it down.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't actually tested it out, but it installed successfully on the team.
Okay. Cool. Then they may have just released it before I've given this talk, so which is entirely possible. So we're going to show you here. I'm actually going to remove that SQL file, but as we can see, I have nothing in this directory. Show you, I've put this directory on my desktop, which I really don't want to get into because apparently I'm realizing that everybody, when they present, has these nice clean desktops, and I've got millions of different things like company logos and pictures of my kids and all sorts of other photos. So it's on my desktop. It's under Texas Cam. We're going to start with the first one, which was test Doxil. Now this is kind of explaining to you what is involved. So as I said, first we just need to make sure we have the .doxil folder, and then we run bin start. Now I already had Doxil installed on here. Things are running slightly quicker because I've already downloaded these images locally. That is the first thing. It's the first time you've actually used these. You need to download images. It will take probably a couple minutes just because it has to go out to Docker Hub and has to download them locally. But it stores them in cache so that the next time you have to spin up a project, they're within your local machine, so you don't have to go back out. All right, so we started with, hey, this is our virtual host. Everything starts off with a .doxil domain. That is customizable, and that can be done through configuration. If you're interested in that, definitely check out the document file, or docs.docker. I'm going to be tongue-tied here. docs.doxil.io. There we go. So we push it. Okay. My big issue right now is I have no pages. I have nothing to show you guys because I started off with a blank folder. So by default, we always look for a doc root folder. That is kind of the standard. That is customizable as well. And now we are just going to write infamous PHP info file. That, when we refresh, there we go. Now, to explain a little bit more, you will see I am running on my local machine. I'm running 7.16. In my container, I'm going to be running the same thing, which is coincidentally enough kind of funny. Yeah. So, but to expand upon a gentleman's question from earlier, we have these things called stacks. And by default, we use something called a default stack. Now, the default stack reads, we'll expand that. And so, the question you asked earlier was, how can you specify what version of what you want to use? So, my answer to you is that a Docker image composes of the Docker image name, so who the provider is and then what the image name is. Separated by a colon is a tag related to that, what specific version you want to use. So if you navigate to hub.docker and you say, I want to see what's available for PHP, and you navigate to the tag section, you'll see these are all the items that you could replace with. So in this example, we say Doxil/CLI. Now that CLI comes with a whole bunch of extra additional tools. It comes with Drush. It comes with Drupal console. It comes with WP CLI. It also comes with Terminus installed. But if at whatever point you wanted to just start off with fresh PHP, you would just use PHP : and then whatever version. So PHP : 5 ZTS Alpine. This will tell you how big the image is. Usually the smaller the image, the quicker it will download.
7 hours. Pretty fresh.
Yeah. So there are things in here. It goes all the way down to 7. If there is no tag, as we call it, defined, then it will always grab whatever is labeled as latest. Latest is usually referred to as the most recent version of that. So Latest in this context refers to 7.26. In which case, yeah, so it will give you just the CLI, and it will give you version 7.26. To slightly expand upon the configuration question is, if you've used YAML before, you can write the configuration. The configuration is comprised of what services specifically do you need to run for your project. As I said, the default comes with three things. It comes with a web container, which, as you can see, we're extending whatever's in services, so that's all configured there. So that's basically Apache 2.4. It comes with a database, which is MySQL 5.6, and then for CLI, it comes with PHP 7.1. So this is what you start off with, and then you can expand upon it. Expanding upon it means that we'll go into adding in additional variables to those to those specific containers, and then adding containers. So I have this commented out at the moment, but if I wanted to use MailHog, that I would add that in there. We are using standard Drupal or Docker Compose files to build the services, and then from that point, it's running a whole bunch of other commands in the back to make sure that it's easy enough as possible to set up. The final piece, so yeah, that's how you would set up. If you wanted to say run a Selenium browser with additionally Behat, we're writing behavior-driven tests, but we don't want to have to worry about setting up Behat on our local machine. We don't want to have to worry about setting up Selenium on our local machine, because guess what? We're only going to be using it for this one project, and then we can get rid of it. But once again, why install it? Why have it take up that space? And then why take the necessary time to remove it and make sure we've actually removed everything as part of the cleanup process? The next piece, so yes, we showed what that is. One thing I do want to show you is test Drupal. So I mentioned earlier about kind of this interface of what particular tools do you want to install. Now this is an older interface. We actually just did a new one, so if you go to start it within the next couple days, you'll notice that it's more looks a little bit better than what we have right now. But yeah, we have Drupal 7, Drupal 8, WordPress, and from that point, you're saying, okay, well, I want to install a Drupal 7 site. It says, okay, well, we're going to install this at this location. This is going to be what the name of the site is, and this is what your URL is going to be. Do you want to proceed? Yes. So it goes and it clones down the boilerplate, and I'm already running test Drupal. Run again.
Real quick, while that's
Yep.
if I were to run, say, Gatsby on the front and Drupal 8 on the back, just basically fire up two projects within a parent folder.
No, so you could actually, we were actually just having this conversation earlier, in that you would set up an additional container, which basically refers to what your web endpoint would be. So at that point, you could customize it to be whatever URL you need it to be, and then you would have an additional endpoint for your Gatsby endpoint. So you'd have you'd have one project, but you'd have two kind of web containers. The first web container would be your Gatsby and kind of what people what you would be calling to get that to load. The additional would be what the API input would be. Great. So during that process, it cloned the boilerplate setup we had, and then it ran the fininit command that we have within the actual project. So now when we go to there, now we have a Drupal 7 site. All within, that says 7 seconds. I think we did it in roughly less than 30. Now those are for examples. The last one that I wanted to really get to was expanding upon how, and I might be able to. So last night I decided to install MAMP, make sure like I could show you exactly what the process would be to download. If you're going from a MAMP or somewhere else, you know how to set up. So basically I'm taking my Drupal project to kind of show you. So I have a Drupal Doxil Texas Camp demo, and then we're going into MAMP, and we're going to phpMyAdmin, and we're doing an export basically using the same tools we would use with Vagrant and MAMP in general. So the one thing I do have to do is the way phpMyAdmin exports it, I have to add a database rename, but that is it. So at that point, I am going to drop database, drop table, and then I'm going to say go. And we'll see that I'm getting the localhost SQL file, test Texas, and then we make that Doxil folder. Within the Doxil folder, we make what we call an environment file. The environment file is really, how do you reproduce that item in your local. So, as we said before, the stack is default, and my doc root. My doc root with Drupal 7 isn't going to be in a doc root folder, isn't going to be in a web folder, it isn't going to be in a public HTML folder. My Drupal I did not set up a Drupal 7, I set up a Drupal 8. Okay. My doc root is actually going to be the same as my project root. I don't have an extra additional folder. So what I did was specifically say that, hey, my doc root is the current directory I'm working in, as opposed to specifying what an additional variable for that file, an additional folder for that doc root. We're going to do fin start. And we'll see, once again, it's going a little bit quicker because we already have those containers downloaded. So, great, we're done, right? No, we ran into issues. The issue is we got to import the database that we downloaded. So, we say, okay, let's go to where that file downloaded, and let's import that. Great, so it's now taking everything that was in that file and it's importing into the default database. We're going to go one step closer real quick, and we have to edit the connection details. And mind you, when I first started this, it was just me copying the folder. So, I'm setting the default database name is default, and the default user and password is user. Your database host, which I will show you in a second where you can check that, is DB, and then the port is your standard 3306. I'm going to quickly run a we're going to run a fin drush CR because now we're not assuming that I have drush installed on my local, and we're running into issues. So, the beauty of live demos. Okay, so we did run into issues with and I think the problem I'm going to run into is we're using the Drupal instead of all right, let's do that again. All right. So make sure real quick that that database is loaded. Great. Yes. So that is that one command I showed you, the fin SQL Pro, which will open up SQL Pro for us. Then we're going to run fin drush CR to cache rebuild. Great. And then I ran into, great, well, we have content here, and that's working. So I'm going to stop it right there. Yes, it looks like it's horrendous. The one thing I did find out I need to modify is that MAMP modifies the temp directory. So by just modifying that in the UI, then...
Did you copy the whole MAMP directory? So you have the whole of MAMP?
No, I just have just my one project.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, just the one project. So I'm not going to be able to get to more. The one thing I do want to leave you off with, and I'm going to publish this, but the idea of eventually using Doxil in it as a QA environment for the less technical, for our project managers, for people who need to be able to just have an environment that they can test on. So if you use Acquia's tool, which I'm still drawing a blank on, or you used a
Acquia Dev Desktop?
No, not Dev Desktop. It's like a multi-dev version. It's like RA.
Lightning?
No, Lightning's the distro. It's similar to Pantheon's multi-devs. So, by doing this now, you can kind of have your own place that you can go and test your QA process, but not having to, if you're not working on Pantheon, if you're not working with Acquia, and you're working with another hosting provider, you'd have that ability to do that. That is what's possible. Additionally, I wanted to have time, but I'm realizing that we just crammed so much into this. If you have questions, flag me down. I have cards. If you want to reach out to me at a later point and ask questions, please do. I am here to answer anything you have. All right.